Welcome to Sin Series Recap. Andrew was racing to his workplace that morning before his boss arrived. Meanwhile, a woman called Margaret was getting ready to leave for work at her apartment. Margaret works as the head editor of a publishing business in Boston, Massachusetts. Because of her meticulous temperament and strictness, all of the staff at the workplace feared her. They used to mock her behind her back. Andrew was already waiting for Margaret when she got at her office. He followed her to the marketing department of the corporation. When they returned, Margaret fired Bob right away for a trivial mistake. He neglected to contact an author for their assignment. Margaret chose to terminate him despite the fact that it was a minor issue. Instead, when they returned to Margaret's office, she told Andrew that he had to work the next day, even though it was Sunday. Andrew had planned a trip to Alaska with his mom to celebrate his grandmother's 90th birthday. He refused, but Margaret threatened to terminate him if he didn't show up. Margaret was summoned to her boss's office shortly after. Her work visa extension application had been denied. Margaret turned out to be a Canadian immigrant whose visa had expired that year and needed to be renewed. She was not allowed to leave the country until her visa was extended, but she went above and above for the sake of her career. Even though she had her guy on the project, she was concerned that it would not go well. She had a trust issue and was continually getting involved to check on the development. Due to the breach of her visa, she faced deportation from America to Canada. If that happened, she'd be fired, and her likely replacement would be Bob, the person she just dismissed. Andrew burst into the office in the middle of the meeting. Margaret had an enlightenment. She informed the supervisor that she and Andrew will be officially married shortly in order to retain her job. If an immigrant married a citizen, the immigrant would be awarded citizenship in 3 years, not 5, as the rule originally said. Andrew could say anything, but he realized his employer was having a trouble, so he kept his lips shut to assist her. Fortunately, her manager believed her and advised that she apply for immigration so that the matter could be fixed swiftly. Margaret's marriage became the talk of the office in a couple of seconds. They had no idea Andrew would marry the boss. As they returned to Margaret's office, Andrew, who was already perplexed by everything, inquired as to what she meant by marrying her. She stated that she was experiencing problems with her visa and needed his assistance, but her tremendous self-esteem revealed her domineering character. She stated that they should apply for immigration without Andrew's approval. She stated that they would have a pretend marriage till her visa was renewed, and then divorce the following month. She reasoned that if she lost her work, Bob, the person she fired who despised both of them, would take her place. To top it all off, he would later dismiss Andrew as well. If he wanted to maintain his job, she asked him to assist her. They went to immigration after work to petition for their marriage. She begged the officer to hurry the marriage application, but the officer responded that applying for 2 separate citizenship weddings would take longer than usual marriages. They had to go through an interview procedure in several locations and under strict monitoring. If they were found to be lying about their marriage, Margaret would be deported back to Canada and barred from visiting America, while Andrew would face 5 years in prison or a $250,000 fine. She attempted to demonstrate the validity of their marriage. They had been dating, she added, and they had planned to visit Andrew's parents on Sunday to celebrate his grandmother's birthday. Fortunately, the officer bought their tale, but he stated that he would still oversee them to ensure that everything was in order. To make the story more convenient, Andrew himself offered his promotion as an editor in his office that is promised by Margaret and kept secret from others. The officer believes that story.
Both at 11 o'clock Monday morning for your scheduled interview.
After they left the immigration office, Margaret planned her work for the next month and explained all rules. When they were doing their fake dating, feeling that Margaret was taking advantage of him, Andrew felt annoyed, especially since the risk of being found out was too great if she still wanted to do the thing. Andrew asked for 3 conditions. Andrew makes sure that he will be the editor and that 20,000 copies of his manuscript will be printed. Margaret promised Andrew he wanted his work to be published, moved to the editor division, and, lastly, the most shocking of all that made Margaret baffled, he wanted her, a woman with high self-esteem, to kneel down begging him to marry her, to propose Andrew to the public. She was shocked to hear all that, but she was in dire need of help, and so she did it. Andrew and Margaret left on Sunday for Alaska to visit his parents. Margaret mentioned on the aircraft that she would remain at the hotel throughout their visit. She knew Alaska wasn't as luxury as where they were from, and she assumed Andrew's family was poor, so she agreed not to worry them. Moreover, she informed him that when the officer inquired later in the interview where they generally spent their time while dating, she urged Andrew to merely answer that they primarily spent their time in her apartment. She expected that Andrew's apartment was not as big as hers and thought that the officer wouldn't believe a boss like her would like to spend her time in a small apartment. Andrew remained silent after hearing this. Andrew's mother and grandma were waiting for them when they arrived. Margaret saw that practically every structure bore Andrew's family name, and even the bags he carried bore the name Paxton.
Don't do that. Didn't tell me about all the family businesses, honey.
Margaret begged Andrew's permission to hunt for a hotel at the port, but Andrew's mother suggested she remain with them. When she found out that they had to use a boat to go to his house, she explained that Andrew's family was so impoverished that they had to take the boat. She assumed Andrew lived far from town since he was so poor, but after a long ride on the boat, they arrived at the Paxton family's home, a large mansion on a private island.
Home?
Andrew's family owned the island. Not only that, but they also owned the companies and assets in town that bore the Paxton family name, including the hospital and airport. She had no idea Andrew's family was so wealthy when she arrived. They were greeted with a party when they arrived at the residence. Margaret inquired as to why he had not told her about his family, to which he answered that it was unimportant. Also, his family has no connection to his profession. Andrew's ex-girlfriend arrived shortly after. After that, he introduced her to Margaret. His mother then asked him to tell her how he proposed to Margaret, which he lied about because they never anticipated to be asked such a question. Because of the disparity in their stories, they ended up criticizing each other. Everyone applauded when they finished. When they requested him to kiss, he took Margaret's hand and kissed it.
Ready? Mwah.
Nobody anticipated his kissing her hand. They forced them both to kiss on the lips, and they eventually did it only to make things difficult between them. They then proceeded to the bedroom to relax, but because there was only a single bed, Andrew had to sleep on the floor. Margaret received a call from her customer the next day, but the family dog interrupted her conversation. Something strange happened when an eagle appeared out of nowhere and scooped up the dog. She tried to bring the dog back by tossing her phone and was successful.
Okay.
But the eagle attacked and snatched her phone. Andrew approached her in the midst of the chaos. Margaret informed her soon-to-be husband that an eagle had stolen her phone. Andrew pledged to purchase her a new phone as a nice boyfriend, even if it was merely a prank. He then instructed her to hug him because her mother and grandma were standing outside the window observing them. Later that day, Andrew ran into his father, who was out golfing. His father informed him that he would be retiring shortly and requested him to take over the family company. It turns out that they had discussed it several times. His father even set him up with his business partner once, but Andrew refused to assume responsibility for the family firm or accept the matchmaking. He was an adult, and he could make any decision he pleased. He even said that he would never come back if it was not for his grandmother.
Seems strange to you, my life in New York, sitting in an office.
Margaret, Andrew's mother, grandmother, and ex-girlfriend were holding a bachelor party in a women's pub. The celebration was designed to perpetuate the tradition of every couple who would marry having a bachelor party. Margaret elected to leave the party because it was getting too rowdy. That's when Andrew's girlfriend arrived. She praised her and said she was a lucky girl to be with Andrew. She told Margaret about all of her happy recollections from when she was still with Andrew. Margaret didn't appear to mind, but she could feel envy rising in her heart. They returned home to find Andrew expressing his rage by cutting wood while listening to music. His mother was fully aware that he would do this every time he disagreed with his father, so she went to reprimand him. The father-son feud has never been resolved since the old days. Her spouse was constantly imposing his selfishness on Andrew, despite Andrew's refusal. She wanted her husband to honor Andrew's decision for his life, therefore she relented on all the family business matters. Margaret heard the dialogue from a distance. Later, when Margaret was walking out of the bathroom after a shower, Andrew entered the room without knocking. Things between them are no longer uneasy.
Why are you
God! Don't look at me!
I don't understand!
Margaret later questioned Andrew about why he opted to be an editor instead of running his family's business. Andrew stated that he has always wanted to be an editor since he was a child, which he attributes to his environment. Margaret also shared her life story with Andrew. She was her parents' only child in Canada at the time. She came to America from Canada, despite the fact that she had no family here. She battled to make ends meet until she landed a job in a respectable firm, and even a respectable position, as she now had. From there, From the tough life she had, she became what she is now, a hard and strict woman that everyone is scared of at the office. Andrew has gotten to know her better since then. He was aware that his employer, like other women, needed affection. For her, a lady whose hardness concealed her frail heart.
What?
Nothing.
Someone knocked on Andrew and Margaret's door the next morning while they were still asleep. Margaret became terrified and awoke Andrew, asking him to move next to her. As the door was opened, the entire family entered. Andrew's grandmother unexpectedly requested that the wedding be moved to tomorrow, her birthday. They were both shocked and tried to get an excuse to refuse the plan. His grandmother kept pushing them to do so, and they had no choice but to accept it. His mother told them that everyone in the family would arrange everything so they didn't have to worry about anything. Andrew was terrified when they finally departed. His family had taken his life too far. His grandma would have a heart attack if they married and divorced after only a month. Margaret unexpectedly hugged and consoled her phony boyfriend to calm him down, only to understand what she had done afterwards. Margaret went for a bike ride later that morning to clear her head. Instead of settling down, she became even more confused. She recalled her unintentional embrace of Andrew that morning. She heard a weird sound from the forest in the middle of the trip, and when she looked, it was Andrew's grandmother conducting a peculiar ceremony to ensure everything went properly on the wedding day tomorrow.
It's I, Grandma Annie. Oh, I see you.
Margaret participated in the rite but embarrassed herself by dancing.
So you bitches, go!
Andrew arrived unexpectedly to pick her up and get her a new phone. She was mortified. She hadn't expected him to see her in that light. Margaret stated at the store after receiving her new phone that she needed to respond to an email from her customer. Andrew led her to an internet cafe, knowing her phone wouldn't be able to respond to emails. Margaret was on the computer when she noticed Andrew chatting with his ex-girlfriend through the window. She felt envious. She was aware that she had fallen in love with him, but she was also aware that Andrew would never fall in love with a woman like her. They ran across Andrew's mother and grandma on their way home. They told Andrew to stay at the boat while they went with Margaret. As they were trying for gowns, they headed to a closed shop. Margaret was told by Andrew's grandmother that the dress she was wearing was the same one she wore to her wedding. Not only did Andrew's grandmother give Margaret the clothing, but she also handed her a necklace that had been passed down through the Paxton family. She had always wanted to give the necklace to Andrew's future bride, and now she could. She was moved. She was able to experience the warmth of the family again after years of living alone. She took over the wheel and drove the boat at full speed when they boarded the boat afterwards. Margaret informed Andrew that she couldn't continue their falsehoods in the middle of their journey. She couldn't face the thought of hurting his family, who had been so kind to her. Andrew became terrified by her actions, and as she let go of the wheel, the boat took a rapid turn and she plunged off it.
Margaret!
Andrew, thankfully, was able to save her. He appeared concerned, as if he didn't want to lose her.
Come on.
As they returned home, Andrew's father requested that both of them meet him at the warehouse. There was apparently already an immigration officer waiting for them. Andrew's father and the officer had figured out that the marriage was a ruse to expedite Margaret's visa extension. The officer threatened Andrew with jail if he was not truthful. Instead of being terrified, Andrew became enraged. He was tired of his father intruding in his personal problems, even going so far as to involve an immigration official. He confidently said that he loved Margaret no matter what happened. He would marry her and make her the happiest woman in the world. They had to sleep alone at night because they were getting married that night. Andrew couldn't sleep because he couldn't stop thinking about what he had said that day. He knew he said everything from the bottom of his heart, but he doubted Margaret would feel the same way. Margaret was having trouble sleeping in another room. Andrew's comments moved her, but she questioned whether he truly meant them. In addition, she was feeling guilty. She was just causing difficulties for Andrew and his family the entire time she was there. The long-awaited day had finally arrived the next day. The event was attended by everyone, including the immigration officer. The entire family appeared to be in good spirits until Margaret and Andrew were set to exchange vows. Margaret abruptly came to a halt. She admitted that the marriage had been a setup. She had always sensed the family's warmth and generosity when she first met them. She didn't want to lie to them, so she confessed in front of everyone. She further claimed that she was the one who planned the wedding and that Andrew was only a victim because she threatened to fire him if he refused to participate. She fled right after her confession. While thinking about her, Andrew tried to calm everyone down. He attempted to find her in her room, but she was nowhere to be found. Just the wedding gown, the script he authored, and a letter from Margaret apologizing for not publishing his work were discovered. She was aware of how wonderful his work was, but she never publicized it for fear of losing such a dependable aide as Andrew. Before being deported back to Canada, she agreed to publish his work. His ex-girlfriend appeared out of nowhere. She advised him to pursue his passion. When he heard it, he dashed to the airport to pursue Margaret. Margaret was taken home by the immigration officer. The officer allowed her one day to gather her belongings and depart the country. Andrew, on the other hand, was stopped by his father as he was hurrying to meet up with Margaret. He warned Andrew not to do what he was going to do. Andrew's grandma collapsed from a heart attack after seeing their never-ending dispute. Soon later, the ambulance plane arrived to transport her to the hospital. His grandma appeared weak aboard the plane. She begged her son and grandson to make amends and respect each other's choices on her behalf. Andrew and his father agreed to call it a day. She closed her eyes slowly, as if she was ready to die, but then she opened them again. She knew Andrew had to meet Margaret at the airport. She instructed the pilot to fly them to the airport. When they got at the airport, Andrew quickly contacted his friend who worked in the watchtower to request that a jet departing for Boston be diverted. He was, however, too late. The jet had already taken off.
Oh, no! No!
Margaret was observed packing items from her workplace the next day. As she approached one of the employees for assistance, Andrew appeared in front of her, gathering his breath from racing. After everything they had been through, he implored her not to leave. She'd destroyed his years of working for such a terrible employer. She had spoiled their wedding ceremony, and the most terrible part was that she had shattered his heart by abandoning him. He begged her to accept responsibility for falling in love with him. He implored her not to go after what she had done to him in public. He ventured to ask her to marry him. Margaret accepted the proposal quickly after learning that the guy he loved had proposed to her. They exchanged kisses in front of everyone. Margaret and Andrew returned to the immigration office a few days later to renew for their marriage visa. Even though the officer was still angry with them for lying to him the day before, he offered them a second opportunity with one condition: no more lies between them. Thanks for watching. Be sure you subscribe to Sin Series Recap and comment your thoughts on the movie The Proposal.